I had been on the road for a little over an hour when the hands-free phone started ringing. The sun was down behind me, and the last of the light had gone gray along the hills to the west. It was cold enough that I had the heater running near my feet, though the windshield kept fogging at the corners. I reached toward the dash and pressed the call button.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, Lexi.
Are you still on schedule?
Yeah, I'm westbound. There was a pause while the truck climbed toward the first mountain pass. The engine pulled hard beneath me, and the empty darkness beyond the headlights seemed to rise and fall with the road. I had driven this stretch often enough to know where the pavement narrowed and where the wind usually pushed against the trailer, though I still watched every curve.
The college sent me another notice.
She said. I kept my eyes on the road. About the payment?
Yeah, they said if the rest isn't paid by November 1st, they'll cancel my spring registration.
She said it plainly, but I knew what it cost her to say it that way. Lexi didn't like asking me for money. She especially didn't like asking when she already knew I was working for it. How much time is that?
Not much.
I looked through the windshield at the dark road and the pale strip of shoulder. October 14th had come in colder than I expected, and the truck's headlights made the roadside grass look silver. I know, I said.
Dad, I need to know. Can you do it?
The next 2 runs cover it. I said it before I had worked out whether it was true. I had already postponed the payment twice, but Lexi didn't know that. I had told her the money was coming, then told her there had been a delay, then told her I needed a little more time. The next 2 runs cover it, I repeated.
Are you sure?
Yes. She didn't answer right away.
You're driving somebody else's truck.
She said. I know what I'm driving.
That's not what I meant.
The truck moved through a long bend, and the trailer shifted behind me with a low groan. I had lost my own rig in bankruptcy, along with most of what I thought I had managed to hold on to. 2 divorces had taken care of whatever the bankruptcy missed. After that, driving somebody else's truck was less humiliating than it sounded. The company paid nearly twice my former rate for the overnight stretches between Fallon, Austin, Eureka, and Ely, and that was enough to make the arrangement seem reasonable. I'm being careful, I told her.
That isn't the same as being safe.
Lexi.
Dad, I mean it. If the truck isn't safe, you need to stop.
I said I'm being careful. She let out a breath. She had always been better at saying what she meant than I was. Sometimes that made things easier. Sometimes it just left me fewer places to hide.
Will you call when you get there?
She asked. I'll call after the delivery.
And before the next run?
Yeah.
Promise?
I promise. That seemed to settle her for the moment. She asked if the road was busy, and I told her it wasn't. I asked if she had eaten, and she said she had. The card clipped to the visor hung just above the wheel, laminated and white under the dim cab lights. Mario had handed it to me during my first week on the overnight runs and told me to keep it where I could read it without taking my eyes from the road. I had thought that was mostly a way of making sure nobody lost the instructions. The company had a lot of rules. Most of them involved fuel receipts, delivery times, and what to do if the trailer seal didn't match the paperwork. I had followed rules like that for years. You read them once, then you did what they said. It had a way of drawing my attention even when I wasn't looking at it. Every time the truck bounced over a rough patch, the plastic tapped lightly against the visor. Lexi was still talking when we reached the bottom of the grade.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
What did I say?
I glanced at the phone display, then back at the road. You asked if I heard you.
I asked if you were going to get any sleep before you drive back.
I'll sleep when I get there.
Dad?
Look, I'm fine.
You've already pushed it back twice,
she said quietly. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. I said the next 2 runs cover it.
I know what you said.
The call stayed connected, but neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The road ran straight ahead through the dark, and the truck's headlights reached only far enough to show me what was coming next.
Call me when you get there,
she said. I will.
Please, Dad.
I will. She ended the call, and her name disappeared from the screen. I put the phone back in its holder and adjusted the heater, though the cab had begun to warm up. The pass was ahead of me now, black against the sky, and the highway kept going west toward Fallon. I had 3 weeks of these overnight runs behind me, with the tuition deadline ahead and the second run still waiting somewhere beyond this one. The pass took longer than I expected, and the next few hours went by with nothing happening except the road, the engine, and the occasional sweep of headlights from a truck coming the other way. The heater kept the cab warm near my feet, but the windows were cold enough that the corners fogged whenever I stopped paying attention to them. I was close enough to Fallon that I had started thinking about the delivery instead of the drive when the headlights picked up the salt flat. It spread out beside the highway as a pale strip under the dark sky, flat and empty in a way that made the road feel like it had been laid there by mistake. The mile marker stood ahead on the shoulder, and just beyond it a beige sedan sat with its hazard lights blinking. There was no other traffic around it. I had seen plenty of cars stopped along that stretch. People ran out of gas, overheated, lost belts, or pulled over because some warning light came on, and they didn't know what it meant. Most of them had somebody standing beside the car, walking around with a flashlight, or waving at the next truck that came through. This one had a man behind the wheel. At least, it had something shaped like a man behind the wheel. The headlights caught the back of the sedan, then slid across the rear window as the truck came closer. The silhouette stayed upright and still, with its hands somewhere in front of it. I started slowing down. If somebody was stranded, you stopped. You found out what was wrong. You gave them a ride or called for help or stayed there until somebody else came along. The sedan was about 90 miles from dependable fuel, cell service, or any traffic I could count on. I knew that because I had driven the route enough times to know where the highway stopped being useful. Out there, a person could sit for a long time before anybody noticed them. The truck dropped a little speed as I eased off the throttle. Then the high beams crossed the rear window. The silhouette turned its head toward me. The shoulders stayed square with the wheel, and the rest of it remained fixed in place, but the head rotated slowly enough that I could see the shape of the face come around. I kept both hands on the steering wheel. For a second I thought I had mistaken what I saw. The glass was dirty, the lights were harsh, and I had been driving through darkness for hours. Maybe the man had turned his shoulders and the window had hidden it. Maybe the angle of the car had made the movement look wrong. The head was still facing me. I looked up at the laminated card hanging from the visor. The plastic tapped softly against it with the movement of the truck, the same way it had for the last 3 weeks. I had read the rules before, usually while parked at the yard or waiting for a trailer to be loaded. I had never expected to need one of them. I pulled the card down and held it near the wheel. The instruction was printed on one side, all in a single block. If headlights catch a stalled car with hazards blinking, do not stop, slow, or look at the driver. Radio the mile marker and continue. I read it twice. The truck was still moving toward the sedan. I could feel the weight of the trailer behind me, pushing through the hitch as the road carried us closer. The hazard lights blinked on, then off, then on again, throwing the shoulder into brief red flashes. I reached for the radio. Stalled vehicle, mile 260, westbound shoulder. There was a small break of static before Mario answered. His voice sounded low and flat through the speaker, like he was reading from a form.
Noted. Keep rolling. Do not slow for those vehicles.
I looked at the road ahead instead of the sedan. Do not slow for those vehicles, I said, though I didn't mean to say it out loud. The truck had lost more speed than I wanted. I pressed down on the throttle and felt the engine pull beneath me. The sedan passed along the driver's side, close enough that I could see the beige paint and the red pulse of the hazards reflected in the trailer. I fixed my eyes on the white line ahead. The instinct to stop stayed with me anyway. It felt like leaving someone behind on purpose. This was a person sitting alone beside a salt flat, and I was the only one who had seen him. The sedan fell behind, but its lights stayed in the mirror. They blinked together at the same time, both sides coming on and going dark in perfect rhythm. I watched the road ahead and checked the mirror only when I had to, expecting the lights to shrink as I pulled away. They didn't. Nearly a minute passed. The highway stretched straight behind me, and the hazards remained the same size in the mirror, red against the dark shoulder, still blinking together long after I had accelerated past mile 260. The next 3 hours went by without another car appearing in the headlights. I kept expecting the sedan to show up again in the mirror, but the road behind me stayed dark, and eventually the salt flat disappeared into the rest of the night. By the time I reached Fallon, the sky had started to lighten along the eastern edge. It wasn't sunrise yet, but I could see the fence lines and the low buildings around the freight yard. I pulled through the gate, followed the signs toward the unloading bay, and parked where the dock light pointed me. The laminated card was still in my hand. I had taken it down after the sedan fell behind me and never put it back on the visor. I kept it by the wheel while I climbed out, then carried it with me when I opened the trailer and started getting the freight ready. The card had a crease across one corner from where I had bent it in my grip. A man in a reflective vest checked the seal, looked at the paperwork, and waved me toward the bay. I handed over the load and signed where he told me to sign. The whole thing took less time than I expected, though I wasn't paying much attention to the clock. I kept looking down at the card. The company had given me instructions before. There were procedures for bad tires, late arrivals, missing seals, and cargo that shifted in transit. I had always thought you stopped to help somebody stranded along the highway unless there was a reason not to. The card didn't say unless. It said any stalled car with its hazards blinking. The one at mile 260 had been wrong. I climbed back into the cab and set the card on the seat beside me. The yard was beginning to wake up around the loading bays. Engines started in the dark, metal doors rattled, and somebody dropped a chain hard enough to make me look toward the sound. I picked up the phone and called Mario. He answered before the second ring.
Mike,
Listen, I need to ask you about the card.
which instruction?
The one about stalled cars. There was a short pause. I could hear static on the line, then something that sounded like a fan turning behind him.
Keep rolling.
That's what it says. I'm asking why.
It applies to any stalled vehicle with hazards.
I know what it says.
Then follow it.
I looked across the freight yard through the windshield. The dawn light had reached the tops of the buildings, but the pavement between them was still gray and wet-looking. A forklift moved past the far end of the bay with its yellow warning light turning slowly. I saw a car last night, I said. The hazards were on. I didn't stop.
Noted.
There was a driver inside.
Keep moving.
I did. I know I followed it. I'm asking who wrote it. Mario didn't answer. I turned the card over in my hand. The back was plain white except for a dark line of printing along the bottom. I had never paid attention to it before. There wasn't a company name, a department, or a date. Was this from the company? I asked.
Use the card.
Who wrote it?
That isn't part of the procedure.
I need to know what kind of procedure this is. His voice came back lower than before, still flat but closer to a whisper.
It applies to any stalled vehicle with hazards. Do not stop. Keep rolling.
I held the card between my thumb and forefinger. Even if somebody's waving at me?
Especially then.
That was the same thing he'd said over the radio, though not in those exact words. I thought about the sedan sitting beside the salt flat, the shape behind the glass turning its head toward me. What happens if I stop anyway? I asked. Mario was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. The yard noise came through the windshield in pieces. A diesel engine idled nearby, then shut off. Somewhere behind the cab, a loading door slammed.
Mike,
He said. What happens?
you log it. You keep moving. That's the rule.
Log what?
You keep moving.
That doesn't answer me.
It is the answer.
I pressed the card against my knee and watched a thin strip of sunlight appear along the top of the windshield. I wanted him to say there was a fine, or that the company would fire me, or that I would lose the route. Those were things I understood. Look, if this is company policy, tell me where it came from.
Keep rolling.
Who wrote it?
That isn't relevant.
It is to me.
You've been given the instruction.
I've been given a card.
Use it.
I could hear the yard more clearly now. Somebody was talking near the open bay, though I couldn't make out the words. The truck sat parked beneath me, its engine ticking as it cooled, and I was still holding the card like it might change if I turned it over enough times. "Who wrote the rule?" I asked. Mario didn't answer that. He said something else, too low for me to catch, and then the line went dead. I looked at the phone for a moment before lowering it. I put the laminated card back on the visor. A week passed before I took another overnight run, though I spent most of that week telling myself I wasn't going to. The card stayed on the visor where I could see it, tapping against the plastic whenever I drove over a rough patch of road. I kept thinking about the sedan 260 miles in, and about the driver turning his head toward me through the rear window. Refusing the run would have meant losing the money. Lexi's tuition deadline was still ahead of us, and I had already told her the next 2 runs would cover it. So I took the truck back onto Highway 50. It was late at night when I reached mile marker 202. The road was empty in both directions, and the darkness beyond the headlights looked just as wide and flat as it had the first time. I saw the sedan before I saw the other vehicle, its hazard lights blinking on the shoulder ahead of me. The red lights came on, went dark, and came on again. I eased off the throttle. Then the headlights reached the second vehicle, stopped farther ahead with its hood raised. A man stood beside the engine compartment, waving a flashlight toward the road. The beam moved across the pavement and caught the side of my truck. There were shapes behind the rear window of the vehicle. I couldn't make out much at first, only dark forms sitting close together in the back. They looked like people. The man with the flashlight turned toward me and started waving harder. I had already moved my foot toward the brake before I looked at the card. The instruction was still there, printed in the same plain block of letters. When you come upon a stalled car with its hazards blinking, don't stop, slow down, or look at the driver. Report the mile marker and keep going. The second vehicle had its hazards on too. I pressed the radio button. 2 vehicles, mile 202, westbound shoulder. The speaker gave back a burst of static. Then Mario answered.
Noted. Keep rolling.
The man beside the open hood stepped closer to the road. He was holding the flashlight in one hand and waving with the other. The light crossed my windshield, disappeared, then came back again. "Please, I need some help over here." His voice carried through the glass, though I couldn't tell if he had shouted it or if the empty highway had simply carried it farther than it should have. I focused on the lane in front of me. "There's a man waving," I said.
Is he moving or waving?
I watched him beside the hood. He was moving now, taking small steps toward the shoulder and then back again. The flashlight pointed directly at the truck. "He's waving."
Then do not stop, especially because he's waving.
Mario's voice had gone lower by the last part of the sentence. It sounded almost like he was speaking from the other end of a large room. The man raised the flashlight higher. "Don't leave us on the highway." I could see the open hood behind him, the engine dark beneath it, and the rear window of the vehicle where the shapes sat without moving. The road was wide enough for me to pass. I pushed the pedal down. The man took another step toward the road. "Please, the hood's up. We can't get it started." I wanted to stop. My whole body wanted to stop, just as it had when I'd passed the sedan on the white salt. The flashlight swung across the front of the truck. I could see the man's face for a second, pale and tight with worry. The people behind him were still seated in the vehicle.
"Mike."
Mario said through the radio. I didn't answer.
"Keep rolling."
The truck reached the first sedan. Its hazard lights blinked against the side of the trailer, and the red reflections moved along the metal in 2 even pulses. I looked toward the rear window as I passed. One of the shapes inside seemed to turn, but the glass was dark, and the headlights were already sliding away from it. The man with the flashlight was farther ahead now, standing beside the open hood. I could hear him calling, though the words broke apart under the engine noise. "Don't leave us." I held the wheel with both hands as I drove past him. The truck pulled me beyond the vehicles, but it didn't feel like I was getting away from them. The road ahead stayed empty, and the trailer moved behind me with the steady weight of freight and steel. I checked the mirror after a few seconds. The flashlight was still raised. The man stood beside the open hood, facing the truck as it moved away. Behind him, the rear window showed 3 heads in a row. They were the same shape, the same size, and held at the same angle, all of them facing forward without any movement. None of them had the shape of a child. For the next 3 hours, I kept the truck moving and tried not to check the mirror more than I had to. The flashlight stayed raised behind me until the road curved, and then the darkness closed over the vehicles. The drive to Eureka went by in pieces. I watched the lane lines, checked the fuel gauge, and kept one hand near the radio even though Mario didn't call again. The card hung from the visor above me, tapping softly whenever the truck bounced over uneven pavement. I could still see the 3 heads through the back window whenever I pictured them. I hated that part most, the way my mind kept going back to something I had already passed. Dawn was beginning by the time I reached the fuel station. It was early enough that the lot was mostly empty, with only a few trucks parked near the building and a row of pumps shining under the canopy lights. I pulled the rig to the diesel island and shut off the engine. The cab became quiet all at once. Without the motor running, I could hear the ticking of the exhaust system and the faint hum of the lights overhead. I climbed down, filled the tanks, and stood beside the pump while the numbers on the display worked their way upward. I was tired in the ordinary way by then. My shoulders hurt from holding the wheel, and my eyes felt dry from the road. The other kind of tiredness was still there too, the one that had started somewhere out by the salt and had followed me past the man with the flashlight. When the pump clicked off, I hung the nozzle back on its hook and walked around to the driver's side. Something white was tucked beneath the windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a receipt. The paper had been folded twice and pushed under the rubber blade near the bottom of the glass. I looked across the lot before reaching for it, though there was nobody near the truck. The convenience store doors opened and closed for someone at the pumps on the other side, and a cleaning cart stood unattended beside the building. I pulled the paper free. It wasn't a receipt. It was a plain piece of white paper, folded into a narrow square. The letters on the outside had been written in block capitals with a black marker. I opened it against the hood of the truck. The note said I'd looked too long at the 260-mile mark. I read it twice. Somebody had watched me pass the sedan on the shoulder. Somebody had seen me look inside the sedan and had known where it happened. I turned the paper over. The back was blank. The trucks parked near the store sat beyond the open pavement, and the windows of the building reflected the whole lot. I checked beneath the truck, then looked along the side of the trailer. There was nobody there. I kept the note in my hand and climbed back into the cab. The card was still hanging from the visor. I looked at the instruction about stalled cars, then down at the folded paper. I dialed Mario. Mario answered almost immediately.
Mike?
Listen, I found something on the truck.
What?
A note, under the windshield wiper. There was a pause, though I could still hear the same faint static that had been on the line the last time we talked.
What does it say?
I looked at the paper in my hand. You looked too long at mile 260. Mario didn't say anything right away. Did you hear me? I asked.
Throw it away.
I held the note against my knee. Somebody put it on my truck.
Throw it away. Log the encounter.
Whoever wrote it saw the car.
Finish the run.
Look, it says they saw me at mile 260. They know what happened out there.
Finish the run, or the company marks you unavailable.
His voice stayed flat, but he had lowered it. It sounded like he was speaking close to the phone, with the words pressed down so they wouldn't carry. I watched the fuel island through the windshield. A man in a dark jacket walked out of the store carrying a cup, then stopped beside a pickup and opened the driver's door. He didn't look toward me. Unavailable for what? I asked.
Future assignments.
So I lose the runs.
Your status is marked unavailable.
Because I kept a piece of paper?
Because you failed to follow procedure.
I followed the procedure. I didn't stop.
Then log the encounter and finish the run.
Who put the note there?
That isn't part of the procedure.
I had expected that answer, but hearing it still made me angry. I wanted Mario to tell me there was a camera, or a driver, or some reason a person could have been waiting beside the road in the dark. Instead, he kept giving me the same pieces of the rule, as if the rest of it didn't matter. Did you know somebody was watching the sedan? I asked.
Use the card.
Did you know?
Throw away the note.
How am I supposed to log it if I don't have it?
You have the mile marker.
I have the note.
Log the encounter.
The call went quiet for a moment. I could hear an engine start somewhere outside, then the low movement of a truck pulling away from the pumps. I need to keep this, I said.
That is not authorized.
I need to know who saw me.
Finish the run.
Who saw me, Mario? He didn't answer. I looked down at the paper again, at the heavy black letters filling the middle of it. They were not rushed. Whoever had written them had taken the time to make each letter clear.
Mike.
He said. I'm not throwing it away.
Log the encounter.
You heard me.
Finish the run, or the company marks you unavailable.
He repeated it exactly, without sounding angry or surprised. I folded the note along its old creases and ended the call. For a while, I sat with it in my hand. The fuel station had grown busier while I was talking. A car pulled in near the store, and 2 people went inside without looking at the truck. The upper floors of the buildings were in morning light, while the pavement beneath the canopy stayed gray. I didn't throw the note away. It showed somebody had seen what happened at mile marker 260, and it was the only thing I had that came from outside the company card. I set it beside the laminated dispatch card, with the writing facing up, so I could see both instructions together. 3 nights passed before I took another run, and during those 3 nights I kept the note beside the dispatch card on the kitchen table. I didn't show it to Lexi. I told her the truck was running fine and that I was still on schedule, which was true in the narrow way that mattered to her. The note wasn't true in any way that helped. I put it in the glove box before leaving, but I kept thinking about it as I drove. The highway was dark and empty, and the card tapped against the visor above me whenever the truck bounced. I had started to recognize the sound. It was small, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The first 2 hours passed without incident. I watched the road, checked the mirrors, and listened to the engine pull the rig west through the dead country. I had stopped looking for the sedan after mile 260, though I still checked the shoulder whenever I saw red lights ahead. It was close to midnight when I reached mile marker 149. I saw the lights before I saw the sign. They spread across the desert on my right, bright and steady against the dark, where I knew there wasn't supposed to be anything open. The Sand Pass rest stop sign marked the exit, its paint washed pale by my headlights. The road map in the truck listed the stop as closed since 2011. I had looked at it before, mostly because there weren't many places to pull over between the longer stretches of highway. The rest area had no fuel, no food, and no reason to be there except for a bathroom and a place to sit for a few minutes. Tonight the lot lights were on. A sedan sat near the restroom building with its hazard lights blinking. The red flashes came on together, stayed bright for a second, and went dark again. I slowed as I passed the exit, looking through the windshield at the empty lot. A woman stood by the restroom entrance. She wore a maroon uniform, or something close to one, with a dark patch on the front of it. She waved both arms toward me and pointed at the trailer behind the cab. Then she cupped one hand around her mouth. I couldn't hear her through the truck, but I could read what she was saying. Your freight needs a weigh check. It looked official, so I kept watching it after the exit went behind me. I had seen enough inspections at bad hours to know they didn't always happen at truck stops or weigh stations. Sometimes somebody pulled you over on the shoulder and asked for paperwork while you stood in the cold. The card tapped above me. I kept going. The next mile dragged. I was tired, and I had been tired for most of the night, but this time the cab seemed too close around me. My shoulders hurt. My eyes felt dry. I watched the empty highway ahead of me, then checked the mirror. The rest stoplights were still visible behind me. I took the next turn around and went back. The exit curved through low brush and brought me into the lot from the opposite direction. The lights shone down over the cracked pavement, making the restrooms look cleaner than they had any right to look. The sedan remained beside the building, its hazard lights flashing, though I couldn't see anyone inside. I keyed the radio. "Sand Pass rest stop," I said. "Mile 149. I'm pulling off." The radio gave back a wash of static. Mario answered after a moment.
Noted. Keep rolling.
"I'm checking the trailer."
Keep rolling.
The stops lit up.
Do not stop because the facility is illuminated.
I looked at the woman by the restroom. She had turned toward the truck again and was waving me closer. "There's somebody here," I said.
Keep rolling.
"I'll be back on the highway in a minute."
Mike?
I took my hand off the radio and parked beside the building with the engine running. The truck shook beneath me, steady and familiar. I climbed down and shut the door, leaving the cab locked behind me. The woman raised one hand as I walked toward her. Up close, the maroon uniform looked old and faded, and the patch on her chest was too dark to read. She waited by the restroom door with one hand on the handle. I was about to call out when she stepped backward and went inside. The door remained open. I stopped a few feet away. The restroom smelled like dust and standing water, though the floor looked dry beneath the fluorescent lights. There was no sound from inside. I could see the edge of a row of sinks and the square mirror above them. "Hello?" I called. Nobody answered. I walked in. The mirror caught me first, pale and tired under the lights. My cap sat crooked on my head and my jacket was still zipped to my throat. Behind me, in the reflection, the trailer doors stood open. Both of them. The inside of the trailer was dark except for the light spilling across the floor from the lot. Several pallets were missing from the freight, leaving empty spaces between the remaining stacks. I could see the straight rows of wood and the black gaps where the cargo should have been. I turned around. The restroom was empty. I ran back toward the truck, nearly slipping on the dusty pavement. The lot lights made the trailer look farther away than it was, and for a moment I couldn't tell if the doors were still open or if the reflection had stayed in my eyes. They were shut when I reached them. The seal hung from the locking bars, unbroken. I grabbed it and pulled hard. The metal rang against the door. It held. The lock wasn't damaged, and there was no gap around the edges. I climbed onto the rear step and checked the hinges, the latch, and the bottom of both doors. The freight was still inside. I went around to the cab. Every light in the lot went out. The restrooms disappeared. The sedan disappeared. The pavement and the low brush disappeared with them, leaving only the truck's headlights and the dark shape of the building. I stood with one hand on the cab door, looking toward the place where the woman had been. Nothing moved there. I got inside, pulled the door shut, and put the truck in gear. The headlights showed the exit ahead, but the road beyond it was invisible. I drove out of Sand Pass without turning around. The radio clicked as I reached the highway.
Mike?
Mario said. "Listen, I pulled into the rest stop. The lights went out, and the car's gone."
Sand Pass hasn't had electricity since 2011.
I held the wheel tighter. The dark lot fell behind me in the mirror. "Then what did I see?"
Keep rolling.
"The woman was there. She waved me in. She said the freight needed a weigh check."
Keep rolling.
"She was standing by the restrooms."
That facility hasn't had electricity since 2011.
I looked at the card tapping above me, then back at the empty highway. Mario's voice came through the speaker again.
Do not stop. Keep rolling.
The rest of the drive took about 3 hours, and I couldn't have said where most of it went. I kept the truck moving through the morning, watching the darkness lift from the road a little at a time. The card knocked against the visor as I drove, while the folded note remained in the glove box beside the other things I didn't want to look at. When I reached the company yard, daylight had settled in and trucks were already filling the place. I pulled into the check-in lane and shut off the engine. The cab became quiet around me, though the ticking from beneath the hood continued for a while. I stepped from the cab with the paperwork in my hand. The check-in took a while. A man at the window looked over the load record, checked something on his screen, and told me where to park the rig. I took the truck around to the assigned space and got out again with the seal still hanging from the trailer doors. It was intact. I had already known that, but I put my hand around it anyway and pulled until the metal cut into my palm. It held against the locking bars without moving. Inside the trailer, the pallets were stacked in straight rows. There were no empty spaces between them, no dark gaps where freight had been taken out, and nothing disturbed except for the marks my own boots had left near the rear. Back in the cab, I spread the papers across the steering wheel. The seal number matched the number on the load record. The freight manifest matched it too. The pallets I had seen missing in the restroom mirror were listed as never having been loaded. I read that line more than once. The load record showed what had gone into the trailer, and the trailer showed the same thing. There was no freight missing. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the restroom seem worse. I took the dispatch card down from the visor and set it beside the manifest. The note came out of the glove box next. Its folded edges had softened from being handled, and the black writing still filled the middle of the paper in the same heavy letters. The paperwork said the pallets had never been there. The mirror had shown me the empty spaces. I sat in the parked cab with both explanations in front of me, and neither one gave way to the other. The company had a record for what was loaded. I had a record of what I saw, though mine was only a reflection that had disappeared when I turned around. My phone was in the cup holder. I picked it up and called Lexi. She answered before the second ring.
Dad?
Hey.
Are you still on the run?
Yeah, I'm at the yard now. She didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear something moving in the background, maybe a door or a chair being pulled across the floor.
You said you'd be home this morning.
I know.
Did something happen?
The answer I wanted to give her was too long, and most of it wouldn't have helped. I looked at the load record again, at the clean list of pallets that had never been in the trailer. The run got delayed, I said. That's all.
Delayed where?
On the road.
Dad?
I rubbed my hand over my face. I was tired enough that the cab seemed to tilt slightly whenever I looked away from the windshield. Look, I need to keep working a little longer, I said. I need to get the tuition covered, and I don't want you asking me to come home every time the truck gives me trouble.
I didn't ask you to come home.
You did last time.
Because you sounded bad.
I was tired.
You said you saw something.
I looked at the note in my hand. The paper had folded itself back along the old crease beneath my thumb. It was nothing I could prove.
That doesn't mean it was nothing.
I didn't answer her. The yard outside had grown louder, with trucks backing into spaces and air brakes releasing in sharp bursts. A driver walked past my windshield carrying a clipboard and didn't look inside. Lexi spoke again.
Dad, promise me you'll stop if the truck isn't safe.
The card lay beside my hand. Its instructions had started with stalled cars, then moved on to the rest stop, the people near the road, and every reason I had found to keep going when I wanted to do something else. I knew what it required if the truck became part of the problem. I also knew what Lexi was asking me for. I promise, I said. She stayed quiet for a moment, like she was waiting to hear whether I meant it.
Please don't just say that.
I mean it.
You're going to stop if it's unsafe?
Yes.
Dad?
I said I will. She exhaled softly on the other end.
Okay.
I kept the phone against my ear and looked through the windshield at the trailer. The seal hung unbroken from the doors. The paperwork said the freight was complete, and the card said stopping could be the wrong thing even when the truck was involved. I'll call you when I know when I'm leaving, I said.
Are you coming home today?
I don't know yet.
Then call me anyway.
I will. When we hung up, I set the phone back in the cup holder. The note and the laminated dispatch card were still on the wheel. I folded the note once and placed it against the card instead of putting either one away. I didn't report the missing pallets as a freight error. The next day passed without giving me much time to think about anything else. I slept for a few hours, checked the truck, and took another overnight run. The tuition deadline was 6 days away, and I still needed the money. This time I kept the note and card in the glove box. I didn't want to see them hanging above me, but I knew I'd find the card whenever I reached for the radio. It was easier to leave it shut away, at least until I was back on the highway. The first few hours passed without anything unusual. The road ran west beneath a clear sky, and the dark desert on either side of me looked almost flat enough to touch. Every so often I saw lights far ahead, and each time I wondered if they were hazards before they got close enough to show me they were just headlights from another truck. I had started noticing hazard lights everywhere. They appeared in my mind even when they weren't on the road. I didn't like thinking about them, but I kept driving. It was near mile marker 88 when the pavement ahead began to shine red. At first I thought there was a single car stopped in the lane. Then the lights spread wider, blinking on and off together across the highway. I let up on the throttle and watched the dark shapes take form in the beams. There were 5 sedans. They were arranged nose to tail across both lanes, close enough together that there wasn't room for another car to pass between them. Every hazard light came on at the same time, stayed lit for a moment, and went dark at the same time. The pattern was so exact that it looked less like 5 cars than one thing with a row of red eyes. I looked toward the shoulder. There wasn't enough pavement for the truck, and the ground beyond it fell away into rocks and low brush. On the other side, the road ended at the line of vehicles and the darkness beyond them. There was no open route around. 5 people stood between the cars. They were too far away for me to make out faces, but each one was turned toward the truck. They stood in a loose row, their bodies dark against the blinking lights, and for a few seconds nobody moved. Then all 5 started walking toward me. They didn't hurry. They stepped forward at the same time, keeping the same slow pace. I watched them come through the headlights while the truck kept losing speed beneath me. I grabbed the radio. 5 cars blocking the highway, I said. Mile marker 88. There are people in the road. The speaker answered with static first. I could hear the engine pulling against the load, the tires humming under the floor, and the faint tapping from the card above me. Mario came on.
Keep rolling.
They're across both lanes.
Keep rolling.
I'm slowing down. His voice changed then, getting louder and sharper than it had been before.
Ram straight through the gap on the left. Don't stop.
I looked at the gap he meant. The 2 leftmost sedans sat close together, but there was a narrow space between them that might have been wide enough for the tractor. It was not wide enough for the trailer, and the people were moving toward it from both sides. There's no room for the rig.
Ram straight through the gap on the left. Don't stop.
The silhouettes had reached the front of the first sedan. One of them lifted an arm. I couldn't tell whether he was waving or pointing. The others kept walking. Their heads stayed level, and none of them looked toward the cars beside them. I put both hands on the wheel. Look, Mario, if I go through there, the trailer's going to...
Keep rolling.
I downshifted. The engine rose beneath me, and the truck began to pull harder. The speed dropped below 70, then climbed again as I pressed the pedal down. I kept the leftmost sedans centered in the windshield and tried to judge the space between them. The roadblock grew larger. I thought about the note in the glove box, about the black letters saying somebody had watched me at mile 260. The truck reached 70 miles per hour. The 5 silhouettes were walking directly into the gap. I tightened my grip on the wheel and aimed between the 2 cars on the left. The tractor shook as it crossed the center line, and the headlights washed over the nearest sedan. Its windshield was dark. I couldn't see anyone inside.
Mike,
Mario said through the radio. I didn't answer. The first silhouette stepped in front of the truck. The headlights caught the shape of his coat, his arms, and the pale outline of his face. He kept coming even though the truck was almost on top of him. I ducked without meaning to. The tractor went through the gap. The sedan folded beneath the front wheels without making a sound. There was no crash, no tearing metal, and no glass breaking against the windshield. The car seemed to bend down into the pavement and slide away under the truck, while the second sedan tipped sideways and scattered into the darkness behind me. I checked the mirrors. There was nothing there. No pieces of metal, no headlights, and no red lights blinking on the highway. The road behind me looked empty except for the long beam from the trailer lights. Something struck the hood. I looked up and saw one of the silhouettes standing against the windshield. Both palms were pressed flat against the glass, and his face was close enough that I could see the dark hollows where his eyes should have been. His mouth was open, but the engine drowned out any sound. The figure slid across the hood as the truck cleared the line of cars. His hands stayed against the glass for another second, leaving no marks behind them. As the truck cleared the line of cars, the figure moved across the hood. His hands stayed against the glass for another second, but they left no marks. The highway was empty again, and the engine pulled like nothing had happened. I watched the mirrors until the last of the darkness behind me settled into a straight line of pavement. There were no cars, no people, and no red lights blinking anywhere in the distance. I waited for the truck to start shaking. I waited for a warning light, a burst of steam, or the sound of something dragging beneath the frame. The wheel stayed steady in my hands. The tires kept their rhythm against the road. The impact had been silent, but I had felt it. I had seen the figure on the windshield. I had seen the cars fold and disappear. My hands were still tight around the wheel, and my shoulders hurt from holding myself that way. A maintenance turnout came up beyond mile marker 88. It was only a wide strip of cracked pavement beside the highway, with a low dirt bank behind it and enough room for the truck to get completely off the road. I slowed down and pulled in, leaving the engine running while the trailer swung wide behind me. The truck stopped without a jerk. I sat there, looking through the windshield at the turnout. The headlights showed pale gravel, a few weeds, and the lower edge of a metal sign with most of its paint gone. Nothing moved beyond the light. I turned off the radio and climbed down from the cab. The front of the tractor looked the same as it had when I left the yard. The hood was still latched. The headlights were still on. There wasn't a dent in the grille or a crack in the plastic around the lights. I walked along the bumper and ran my hand over the metal, checking for a place where it might have hit the sedan or the man standing in front of it. There was nothing. I crouched beside the front tires and looked at the tread. They were dusty from the highway, but there was no glass caught in the grooves and no dark smear across the rubber. I looked beneath the truck for pieces of metal or something hanging loose from the frame. The ground was clean. I went down the side of the tractor, looking at the fuel tanks, the steps, and the rear tires. The chrome on the tanks had a film of road dust over it, though it wasn't scratched. The steps were still bolted in place. I put one boot on the lower step and shook it, then climbed up far enough to see the side mirror. The mirror was intact. The glass showed only my face and the empty pavement. I climbed back down and walked to the trailer. The landing gear was raised, the tires were straight, and the long white sides were unmarked. I checked the wheels, then the underside, then the rear doors. The seal hung from the locking bars just as it had when I left the yard. I pulled on it anyway. It held. There were no tire marks in the turnout except for the ones the truck had just made. No debris had followed me off the highway. I stopped at the rear doors and looked back toward the highway. The roadblock was less than a minute behind me, but the darkness had already closed over it. If the cars were still there, I couldn't see them. I saw no sign that anyone had followed me. I climbed into the cab and picked up the radio. Mario. Static filled the cab for a second before he answered.
Keep rolling.
I'm at a maintenance turnout.
Keep rolling.
I checked the truck. He waited for me to finish. There's no damage, I said. No marks on the tires, no debris, nothing under the truck.
Continue to Ely.
I watched the highway through the glass. The lane lines ran into the dark, clean and unbroken. I drove through 5 cars.
That's not a reportable load event.
I felt the truck hit one of them.
Continue to Ely.
Look, I saw somebody on the hood. He had both hands against the windshield. Mario lowered his voice.
We won't discuss the roadblock on an open channel.
I held the radio in front of me. The plastic casing was warm from the cab, and a tiny red light showed that the channel was still live. Then tell me what happened.
Keep rolling.
Was there ever anything in the road?
Continue to Ely.
I wanted to ask him if the truck was supposed to be undamaged. I wanted to ask whether the people were supposed to disappear, and whether the silent impact was another part of the card's instructions. Instead, I looked at the fuel gauge and the dashboard clock. The run still had hours left, and tuition was due in 6 days. "How far to Ely?" I asked.
Keep rolling.
"Mario."
About 2 hours.
That was the closest thing to an answer he gave me. I put the radio back in its holder and pulled out of the turnout. The engine pulled the rig out of the turnout, and the tires crossed the clean pavement without leaving anything behind except a pair of dark tracks in the dust.
Continue to Ely.
The next day went by mostly in sleep. I woke up that evening, checked the truck, and took the road again, with the deadline ahead and the money unchanged. The card stayed in the glove box this time. I left it there. I knew what it said well enough by then. The highway was clear, and for the first few hours there was nothing to do except watch the road markings and keep the rig between them. It was 3 a.m. when the serpentine belt shredded. I heard a sharp slap beneath the hood, followed by a loose whipping sound that lasted less than a second. The gauges dropped, the engine lost power, and the truck began to coast. I pressed the accelerator, but it didn't respond. The shoulder came up on my right. I guided the rig onto it and let the trailer settle behind me. The hazard lights started clicking before I had stopped, both sides of the truck flashing red into the night. I was near mile marker 44, with about 90 miles between me and anything I could count on for help. The engine gave one last uneven turn and died. After that, the only sounds were the hazards and the ticking metal beneath the hood. I picked up the radio. "Mario, truck's down." Static answered first. Beyond the windshield, the highway was empty. No light showed ahead of me, and the dark behind the truck looked the same. "Serpentine belt," I said. "It's shredded. I'm at mile marker 44. Mario came through the speaker.
Can you restart?
"I don't know." I turned the key. The starter pulled once, then again, but the engine didn't catch. Something under the hood made a dry, slipping sound, and the dash lights dimmed before coming back. "The belt's gone," I said. "It won't move."
Stay in the cab.
I looked at the trailer through the side mirror. The white sides caught the red flash from the hazards, then went dark, then red again. The seal hung from the rear doors. "I need to check it."
Remain in the cab.
"I've got to see if anything's damaged." Mario took a moment to answer. I put the radio down, opened the door, and climbed out onto the shoulder. The air was colder than it had been through the windshield. Wind moved across the highway and carried the smell of hot rubber and oil away from the truck. I raised the hood and looked at the front of the engine. The belt hung in torn strips around the pulleys. Black pieces had wrapped themselves around the lower wheel, and one length of rubber rested against the fan housing. I touched it with one finger and pulled my hand back when the heat went through the glove. I lowered the hood and walked toward the trailer. The cargo doors were sealed. I checked the metal tag, then pulled on the bars to make sure they were still holding. They didn't move. The freight inside was the documented load I'd taken from the yard, with the pallets packed in rows and nothing loose. Then something tapped against the inside of the trailer. It was a slow, steady sound, coming from somewhere behind the doors. Tap, tap, tap. I stood with my hand on the locking bar and listened. The hazards clicked behind me, keeping time with nothing else. I put my ear against the cold metal. The sound was clearer that way. It came from inside the trailer, not from beneath it, or from the wind moving across the sides. Something struck the wall a few feet behind the doors, waited, and struck it again. I stepped back. The tapping stopped for a moment. Then a voice came through the doors.
"Open up, Dad. I'm cold."
It sounded like Lexi. It sounded exactly like her. I reached toward the latch. My fingers touched the locking handle, and I could picture her standing in the dark behind the doors with her arms wrapped around herself. I withdrew my hand from the latch and braced both palms against the doors. The tapping started again, faster this time.
"Dad,
Lexi said.
please open the doors."
I leaned my shoulder into the metal. The metal was cold through my jacket, and I kept my weight against it as the tapping changed to pounding. The first hit made the doors jump beneath my hands. The second pushed them outward. I tried the latch with one hand without taking my body away from the doors. It stayed locked. "Lexi, you're not in there," I said. The pounding grew harder. The doors bowed against my chest, pushing me back a few inches before the hinges caught them. I planted my boots wider on the pavement and leaned forward again.
Dad, I'm cold.
I know your voice isn't hers. The words came out rougher than I meant them to. I kept my eyes on the bars. I didn't look toward the rear of the trailer, and I didn't look along the side to see if anything stood behind me. The pounding continued. It came from both doors now, one blow after another, as if something inside was moving from one side to the other. The metal flexed beneath my hands. I could feel each strike through my arms and into my shoulders. I keyed the radio at my belt without turning around. "Mario." The answer came after several seconds.
Report.
"The trailer's being hit from the inside."
Don't open anything.
It sounds like Lexi.
Don't look back.
I know the rules, but the truck's dead, Mario. The belt's shredded, the trailer's sealed, and something's pounding on the doors. Mario's voice lowered.
The rule was never about the other vehicles.
I kept my shoulder against the doors while another blow pushed into me. "Then what is it about?"
Once you're the stalled vehicle, the stalled ones come to collect. Don't open anything. Don't look back. Don't answer a voice you recognize.
The pounding filled the space between us. "How long does this last?"
Hold your position.
"Mario, tell me what to do."
Maintain the seal.
The voice behind the doors changed back to Lexi's.
Dad, please, I can hear you.
I closed my eyes, but that made it easier to imagine her standing there. So I opened them again and stared at the bars. The trailer kept pressing outward beneath me. I stayed where I was, holding it shut with all my weight. The pounding went on for another minute, or maybe 5. I couldn't tell. My arms began to shake and my boots slid against the grit on the shoulder, but I didn't move away. Then the blows stopped. The last one was lighter than the others, almost careful. After that, the hazards clicked and wind swept over the road. I kept my weight against the doors for a while longer. When I finally stepped away, I did it without turning toward the rear of the truck, and I returned to the cab without looking back. The cab stayed quiet around me, with the hazards clicking outside and the wind moving over the roof. I kept both hands in my lap and faced the windshield, trying not to think about what might be standing behind the trailer. A few minutes passed before headlights appeared far down the highway. They were low and white at first, almost lost in the dark, but they grew brighter as the vehicle came closer. It moved slowly along the right lane, almost crawling. I watched it in the windshield without turning my head. The lights reached the trailer, slid along its white sides, and stopped behind me. The car remained there with its headlights on. The mirrors showed only the light spreading around the edges of the cab and the long shadow it cast under the truck. The trailer stood between us, sealed and empty, though I didn't trust either of those words anymore. I considered starting the truck again, even though I knew what would happen. The belt was gone. I had seen it hanging in strips around the pulleys, and I had heard the engine fail when I turned the key. Still, I reached forward and tried the ignition. The starter pulled once. The engine gave a dry, slipping sound and refused to catch. I let go of the key and looked at the dashboard. The warning lights continued flashing, their red reflections passing over the windshield and the dark ceiling above me. The card's instruction came back in the simplest form I could manage. Don't be seen, remain still. I reached down and switched off the hazards. The red reflections vanished from the glass. The headlights behind me remained, but they didn't reach as far into the cab without the truck's own lights flashing back at them. I turned off the cab light too, and the inside of the truck became almost completely dark. I sat there with my hands resting on my thighs, listening to the ticking engine and the faint movement of air through the door seals. The car behind me didn't start moving. Nothing came from the trailer. For a while, that was worse than the pounding had been. Then a door opened behind me. I heard it close, followed by footsteps on the shoulder. They were slow and even, coming from the rear of the truck. Gravel shifted beneath each step, and the sound grew louder as the figure walked toward the cab. I kept facing forward. The windshield showed the vacant road and its faint gray line ahead. I could see my own reflection in the glass, pale and uneven. The footsteps reached the front of the trailer. They stopped there. I knew the figure was beside the cab before it moved again. I could feel the presence of it through the door, the way you can feel someone standing close behind you without hearing them breathe. The footsteps continued around the truck's hood. They passed somewhere near the hood and came up along the passenger side. I didn't turn toward the windshield's edge. The dark shape of the cab stayed reflected in the glass, and the movement outside remained indistinct. The figure made one slow circle around the truck. I heard its steps move away, then return along the other side. When it reached the driver's door, the gravel stopped shifting. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then someone tapped on the window. It wasn't loud. 2 light taps on the window, followed by a pause, then 2 more. I looked straight ahead at the road. The door was locked, and I kept my hands where they were. The window reflected only darkness and the faint outline of my face.
"Mike?"
Mario said from outside. Mario's voice came through clearly, without the radio's static or distortion. It sounded lower than usual, but it was still Mario's voice. I didn't answer.
"Open the door."
The tapping came again.
"Mike, the instruction has changed. You can come out now."
Mario never explained anything unless he could turn it into a rule. He had told me to keep rolling, remain in the cab and maintain the seal, but he'd never said come out now. The figure tapped the window a 3rd time.
Mike.
I didn't move. There was another pause, longer than the first. When the voice came back, it was Lexi's.
Dad?
My stomach tightened. I kept my face pointed toward the windshield.
Dad, are you still in there?
It sounded like the calls from the road, the ones where she asked whether I was on schedule and told me to stop if the truck wasn't safe. It sounded like the part of her I had been trying to protect by taking these runs in the first place. The figure tapped the glass with 1 finger.
Dad, please open the door.
I closed my hands into fists on my thighs. Lexi would ask a direct question. She would keep asking if I didn't answer. The voice waited for me to answer.
Dad,
It said again.
please.
I stared at the empty lanes ahead. The sky was still black, but there was a thin grayness beginning beyond the low hills. The voice changed again. This time it was mine. Look, I need you to open the door. I heard my own rough baritone through the glass, slightly breathless from the hours on the road. The figure had copied the way I started urgent explanations, even the word I used when I was trying to make somebody listen. Look, it said. The truck isn't safe. Open the door. I kept facing forward. My hands stayed on my thighs, and I didn't look at the figure standing beside me. The highway brightened by slow degrees while the tapping continued against the driver's window. Mike, my voice said. I did not answer. The figure tapped the glass again and used my own voice. The tapping continued for a while, though it got slower as the sky began to lighten beyond the hills. I stared ahead and waited for the voice to say something else in my own voice, but it didn't. The highway stayed empty in front of me, and the headlights behind the trailer faded until I couldn't see them anymore. By the time the sun came up, the car was gone. The figure was gone too. I didn't turn around to check. I sat in the dark cab with my hands on my thighs and watched the first daylight spread across the windshield. The sky went from black to gray, and then the hills took on a dull brown shape. The truck looked ordinary in that light, which was almost worse than seeing it at night. I tried the ignition again after the sun was up. The starter pulled once, then made the same dry, scraping noise. The engine didn't catch. I called the company office from my phone and gave them my location, mile marker 44, with the truck disabled. The person who answered asked whether I was hurt, and I said no. They asked whether the load was secure, and I said the trailer was sealed. They said someone would come out. I waited in the cab with the doors locked. The hazards were still off, and without them, there was nothing to announce where I was, except the truck itself. A few cars passed during the next hour, all of them staying in the right lane and moving around me without slowing down. I looked at the side mirror anyway, The tow truck arrived just before the sun reached the top of the hills. It came up behind me with amber lights turning on the roof, then pulled onto the shoulder ahead of the rig. A man in a dark jacket got out with a toolbox and walked back toward me. He stopped beside the cab. "You Mike?" "Yeah." "Tow company sent me for the tractor and trailer." He looked past me at the dashboard. "You said the engine quit?" The serpentine belt shredded. He nodded as if that explained most of it. "You try restarting it?" "Several times." "All right, pop the hood." I stepped down from the cab while he went around to the front. The morning air was colder than it looked, and hot rubber still smelled from beneath the hood. I raised it for him. The belt hung in black shreds around the pulleys. The tow operator leaned over the engine and moved one of the torn pieces with a screwdriver. It dropped back against the housing. "That'll do it," he said. "I know what it did." He glanced at me, then looked back into the engine compartment. "Looks like the lower pulley caught most of it. Fan's got a little damage. You're not driving this anywhere. Can you fix it here?" "Not on the shoulder." He closed the hood. "We'll drag it in and see what parts we can get." He walked beside the tractor, checking the tires and the fuel tanks. He crouched beside the front wheels, then looked beneath the frame. "Anything hit you?" he asked. "Something happened on the road." "What kind of something?" "There was a roadblock." He stood up slowly. "I don't see any damage." I drove through it. The truck didn't. I looked back at the trailer. The long white sides were clean in the morning light. The seal was still in place, and the tires had no glass in the tread. There were no marks along the bumper, no broken plastic, and no dirt disturbed behind the truck except the tracks I had made when I climbed out. The tow operator checked the seal and pulled on them. They held. "Cargo's still there," he said. "It was there before. Nothing missing." I didn't say anything was missing. He looked at me again, waiting for me to say what I meant. I couldn't explain the cars folding into nothing, or the person on the hood, or the voice behind the trailer. None of it sounded possible in daylight. He went back to the tow truck and pulled out a set of chains. "Did another vehicle stop behind me?" I asked. He looked down the highway. "Not that I can tell. There should be tire marks. There's yours." He pointed at the shoulder. "No other tracks, no footprints either." I didn't answer. He hooked the tractor first, then secured the trailer. When he was done, he climbed into the tow truck and started the engine. I took my phone and climbed into the passenger seat. The cab smelled like coffee and vinyl. A paper cup sat in the holder beside the gear shift, and a stack of road maps had been shoved against the door. The tow operator checked the mirrors before pulling onto the highway. I called the company again. This time someone in the office answered. I gave them the location, marker 44, the tow company's name, and the condition of the truck. Then I asked for Mario. "Who?" "Mario Navarro, the overnight dispatcher." "We don't have anyone by that name." "Look, he assigned the runs, gave me the card, called me every night." "There's no dispatcher named Mario Navarro in our system." I held the phone tighter. The tow truck rolled east with my disabled rig behind us, the trailer following in a straight line as if the night had never touched it. "I've been taking these runs for 2 weeks. "Those midnight Highway 50 runs? They're discontinued." "Why?" "We're not continuing that route overnight." "Because of what happened?" "We're not discussing a cause. Your final payment will be processed today." The payment came through before we reached the yard. It was enough to cover the rest of Lexi's tuition, though it left me with almost nothing afterward. I called her from the company parking lot and told her the money was in the account. "Dad, are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You sound tired." "I am. The truck broke down." "Are you taking another run?" "No." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Promise me," she said. "Please, Dad, don't take another night run." "I promise." I went inside and signed the repair paperwork. The office had already removed the overnight route from my schedule, and nobody asked me to explain the roadblock. Nobody asked about the voice on the radio or the person walking around the truck. I asked one more time for Mario. The company office told me that no dispatcher named Mario Navarro had ever worked there. 91 days had passed since the truck was towed from the highway shoulder, and I checked the driveway every time I heard a car slow near the house. The repair was finished, the company payment had gone through, and Lexi's tuition was covered. Those things were settled in the practical sense, but I didn't feel settled about any of them. I stopped driving after dark. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't know, even when they came during the day. If somebody knocked on the door, I waited until they left. I kept the porch light off at night. It seemed like a small thing, and maybe it was, but the light made the house visible from the road. Lexi came by one evening near the end of the summer. I saw her car pull into the driveway and watched her walk up the steps with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. She had her hair tied back, and she looked tired. She knocked once.
Dad?
I stayed in the living room with the lights off. The television was on mute, showing a weather map that changed colors over the western states. She knocked again, softer this time.
Dad, I know you're home.
I didn't answer. Hearing her voice through the door made something in my chest tighten, though I knew it was her. I knew what her car looked like. I knew the way she stood when she was waiting for me to say something.
Dad, please open the door.
I kept my hands on my knees and watched the dark window beside the television. Her reflection wasn't there. The porch stayed black. After a while, she said,
I just wanted to tell you, the payment went through.
I knew about it already. The company had paid me before the tow truck reached the yard, and the school had sent a confirmation to my phone. Still, I listened to her say it from the other side of the door.
You don't have to come out.
She said.
I mean, you can just talk to me through the door.
I didn't say anything. There was a long pause. I could hear a car passing on the road, its tires making a low sound over the pavement.
Dad?
The voice was hers, but I didn't move. I had heard her voice from the trailer, and I had heard it against the driver's window. I had heard it ask me to open the door when something else was waiting for me to make the wrong choice. Lexi knocked one more time.
Please call me when you can.
Her footsteps went back down the porch. A car door opened, then closed. The engine started, and the headlights swept over the curtains before the car backed out of the drive. I stayed in the dark until the sound was gone. I felt bad about it. I also felt safer, and I hated myself for it. The route reopened not long after that. The company put the midnight runs back on the schedule, and another driver took the tractor and trailer out across Highway 50. I saw the notice on the company page and closed it without reading the rest. It didn't matter what they called the route or how many inspections they added to the paperwork. The road itself was unchanged. I could picture the driver leaving the yard after midnight, with the freight behind him and the card hanging above the wheel. The company had a way of making dangerous things sound like ordinary instructions. Near the shoulder, the driver saw a sedan ahead with its warning lights on. He slowed as he approached, though not enough to stop. The sedan sat angled toward the road, its hood raised and its lights blinking together. The highway stretched empty in both directions, with no buildings or service stations anywhere nearby. The driver kept his hands on the wheel and looked at the sedan as he passed. The hazards flashed red, then went dark, then flashed again. The car appeared empty through the windshield, but he couldn't have known that from the lane. He watched the sedan in the mirror. It stayed where it was, low beside the shoulder, its red lights showing and disappearing in the blackness. The driver didn't pull over. He didn't turn around. He drove west, carrying the freight through the space between one pool of darkness and the next. I don't know whether he heard anything on the radio. I don't know whether someone called him by name, or whether a voice came from the shoulder after he passed. I only know the route was open again,